Hey everyone, I'm Mike Black. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. In this week's video, I sit down with Ted Rossman, an industry analyst at creditcards.com, to talk about all things credit. The initial purpose for bringing him on the show was for him to tell me, hey, what would my credit score be if, at this point in the project? But the conversation was just too good to not just put it all out there for all of you that really want to know how to increase your credit score. Now that being said, let's get to the interview. Really special guest with me today. I'm so excited to be talking to Ted Rossman. He is an industry analyst at creditcards.com, and he's been featured in Good Morning America, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, expert when it comes to all things credit. Ted, welcome to this conversation.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me.
So before we kind of get into things, Ted, why don't you just give everyone a little bit about your background?
Sure, yeah, this is a great topic. I think it's very relatable for a lot of people, so happy to get into it. So basically, I've spent the past decade in the consumer finance space, mostly credit cards, helping people with maximizing rewards, getting out of debt, building their credit score, giving a lot of this consumer financial advice that unfortunately a lot of us don't learn when we're young. It's often not taught in school, it's often not taught at home. A lot of this really has to be kind of self-taught. So that's where we try to come in with that sort of financial education.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess let's start with someone that just doesn't really have a credit score, doesn't know too much about credit. I guess, where do you start? If you really don't know much about credit, how can you start building a credit score?
So first off, just to kind of cover some of the basics of what a credit score even is, because I think this is very confusing for a lot of people. So it's basically a measure of how likely you are to pay your bills. And the most important factor is paying those bills on time. That makes up 35% of the formula according to FICO. FICO, the Fair Isaac company, is really the leader in credit scoring. So 35% of their system is paying bills on time. 30% is how much you owe. A big part of that is what's called credit utilization. So that's credit you're using divided by your credit limit. This specifically refers to credit cards. So basically, you want to use less of it, but have more available. That's the ideal scenario. 15% is the length of your credit history. Ideally, these lenders want to see that you've been managing credit for a while. 10% is the mix of credit. So it's going to be a mix of, let's say, student loans and credit cards and car loans and mortgages. And they want to see that you've done more than just one. And then the final 10% is new credit. They want to see that you're opening credit accounts responsibly, that you're not opening a whole bunch all at once, because that can look risky. That can make you look desperate. So a lot of this, it may already sound a little bit confusing and overwhelming, but the reason it's important is because this number, this 3-digit credit score, is going to go a very long way towards determining what you get approved for, like whether or not you get a mortgage or you get a credit card, even some non-credit things, like you can be rejected for an apartment rental if you have a bad credit score, or you might not be able to get a cell phone plan, or you might have to put down a deposit on your utilities. There's a lot of far-reaching implications to this. So whether or not you get approved, what interest rate you pay, your credit score really is one of the most important numbers in your financial life. I would really put it right up there with your net worth and your income on the important scale.
Yeah, and I can't say enough about this because it's actually interesting. I'm by no means a credit expert, but I've purposefully opened not opened more credit cards, but asked for limit increases. That doesn't mean I spent more on my credit cards. It's because I want I guess it's a lower utilization rate. So
Yes.
the amount of actual debt that I have to the amount of credit that I have, that percentage has gone lower, and I've done that specifically just to increase my credit score.
That's a really smart tip for people. That's actually one of the best things that you can do quickly to improve your score, because everybody always wants to improve their score quickly, but a lot of this is a marathon. This idea of paying your bills on time, great practice, but it's going to take time to demonstrate that track record. Just getting older and managing more types of credit, that's going to help you. But again, that takes time. One of the best short-term things you can do is lower that credit utilization ratio. So you hit on one of the ways to do it, which is to ask for higher credit limits. Another big one is to pay down your balances. And I know that may sound easier said than done, but here's a twist on that. It's usually reported on your statement date. So even if you're in the habit of paying your credit cards in full, which I highly recommend for avoiding those high interest rates. I mean, most credit cards will charge you 15, 20, sometimes even higher percentages. But from a credit score standpoint, avoiding interest is not enough. Like if you have a $5,000 limit and you're charging $4,000 throughout the month, even if you pay it in full to avoid interest, it still looks bad for your credit score because you've used 80% of your available credit. You've charged $4,000 out of that $5,000 limit. The fix there is to make another payment in the middle of the month. So knock that utilization down before that statement even comes out. I've tried to get into the habit of paying my cards every 2 weeks, maybe set a reminder every payday, every other Friday. That can actually really help you bring down the ratio and improve your score.
So I'm curious, when it comes to utilization rate, is there a target utilization rate that is I guess, a good target for your credit score?
The general benchmark that's thrown out there is 30%. So in general, let's say you have $10,000 in available credit, you don't want to be using more than $3,000 at any given time. It's a rule of thumb. It's not a hard and fast rule. So wherever you are, if you bring it down, it's going to help. So if your ratio is at 70%, you bring it down to 50, you're moving in the right direction. The people with the absolute best credit scores tend to keep it below 10%. And remember again that this is usually reported on the statement date. So paying your bills in full is not in and of itself enough. You also want to make sure that whatever that statement balance is not eating up too much of your available credit.
Okay, that's actually really insightful. So it is better though to have a 10% utilization than a 30%.
It is. Yeah, it is. If you can keep it in the single digits, that's ideal. We get to the point of splitting hairs at some point though, and I think that that's another big point about credit is that at some point it's really more about just bragging rights. I mean, once you hit that 740 or 760 and above, you're not going to get better terms if you're an 850, which is perfect and hard to do, by the way. But you're not going to get better terms at 850 versus 825 versus 800. Where the bigger differences are like if you're at 650 or 675 or 700, those 25-point jumps make a big difference. Once you hit that mid 700s and above, it's kind of all the same.
That makes sense, unless you have a girlfriend that is trying to beat you on their credit score.
A lot of people do really geek out.
It is all bragging rights over here.
I'm with you. I do that too, but lenders aren't going to split those hairs, once you're that high.
But what I constantly kept doing, like I said, is just trying to get that increase on the utilization rate, and it was really crazy because I was like, I didn't have the best credit score. It wasn't terrible, but it was like 700 maybe. And I was like, why is this so low? And then as I did research, I was like, okay, it's because of that utilization rate. And all I need to do is just start requesting that increase. Because what you just said is exactly what I was doing, where I had that, say, $4,000 balance on a card that could do $5,000. And once I just kept requesting and kept requesting and kept requesting, it took maybe a year, 6 months, but I was eventually able to get with businesses and personal stuff, hundreds of thousands of dollars in credit limit. And I don't really spend that much. Now, here's a question for you though. I've found this to be interesting. Some companies do this. I don't know if other companies do as well, but some companies would not let me increase my credit limit because I wasn't spending enough. So I'm curious if that's like an industry standard and if there's a way around that, maybe opening up different credit cards, and if that's something maybe that you recommend or not.
This is a big thing that's changed this year, and a lot of it relates to the pandemic and all of the risk associated with that. The economy, jobs. Card issuers are worried that you're not going to pay them back. Not just you, but everybody. I mean, they're worried about the state of the economy and jobs. And typically what we see is that when unemployment spikes, credit delinquencies spike as well. Now, that actually hasn't happened this time around just yet, and we think that the stimulus programs are a big part of that. We think also the fact that people have been spending less and really making debt payoff a priority has helped. But nonetheless, that's the worry. And we've actually seen, according to the Federal Reserve, 60% of banks have actually tightened their credit standards. So they're going to be approving people for lower limits if you get approved at all. Sometimes they're even slashing existing users' credit limits. This often happens if your card is dormant. Yeah, this is a big gotcha for a lot of people because this happened to me actually. I got a letter in the mail recently from one of my card companies saying that they were going to cut my limit basically in half because I wasn't using the card enough.
Wow.
And they're just
I did
worried
not know they
about
could do that. That's interesting.
Yeah, they have a lot of latitude to make these changes, and it really surprises people. And if you're using the card as your emergency fund, it's dangerous. That credit may not always be there. Now, in my case, I was able to plead my case and ask the company to reverse it because I knew this was going to hurt my credit score. And they actually did. But the point is that if your card's dormant, if you're showing risky behavior like paying late or running up a lot of debt, you're definitely at risk for getting your limit cut. It's something that happens during recessions. The funny thing is, a year ago, it was super easy for most people to request a higher limit because that was really much more of a risk-on environment. We've really shifted to more of a risk-off, at least right now. So it's gotten harder to get approved. You mentioned also that you used to have a 700 credit score. That was fine. That was pretty good about a year ago. Now we're looking at more like 740 as the cutoff for approvals and denials in most cases. So we've definitely seen issuers get a lot more selective here.
This is super interesting. What's actually funny is in my scenario, this actually happened to me before, I believe it was before the pandemic. I have one of my business credit cards is with Capital One, and they just would not increase my limit. And I was like, I have a really good credit score. I pay my bills on time. Never once had a late payment ever. Why won't they increase it? And I didn't understand. Then I opened up another credit card with Chase, and then Chase gave me a huge limit. So I was like, okay, problem solved. So question is, do you recommend that people have multiple credit cards, whether it's for personal and or for business?
In general, I do recommend having multiple cards. The thing is that you have to know yourself, though. Like if you're the kind of person who's going to view a big credit limit as a way to overspend, that's a problem. So you need to rein yourself in. Now, if you have the willpower to have a lot of credit and not use much of it, then yeah, have multiple cards. It'll help your credit score. You can chase rewards on different cards because everything's a little bit different. You could get one card that really leans into the grocery category and another one for restaurants or airlines or whatever the case may be. In general, the best way to maximize rewards and help your credit is to mix and match different cards. But if that's going to be a problem for you, if you're just going to overspend or if you're going to be disorganized and miss a payment, then you either want to just stick to cash and debit or have just one card that you really stay on top of.
It's funny, Ted, I'm the same way as you. I literally pay my cards every 2 weeks. And what I do for me, and this really helps, is, running a company, I still, at this point in time, I still take care of paying everyone, doing all of our receivables and payables. So I do it every 2 weeks. So when I pay everyone, that's when I spend my time on paying off all my credit cards. So every 2 weeks, I pay off my credit cards every 2 weeks. And I think you definitely hit the nail on the head there. This is something my parents just pounded into my head is do not avoid debt if you can, especially credit card debt. So for me, it's easy to stay on top of that. As Ted said, I think if you do have more issues on staying on top of paying the full balance on your card, getting more than one credit card might be could be more trouble than it's worth. But I have a lot of friends that are very big into having, I have a friend that has 10 plus credit cards and he plays the whole game of rewards really, really, really well. And he does that full time, I believe, is he consults people on how to really, he consults people that are business owners on how to maximize their credit cards with things like rewards, which is really cool. I know that it sounds like you do some of that as well. So I'm curious, Ted, how many credit cards do you have?
It is definitely a game for a lot of people. It's interesting. I've actually consolidated a bit this year. I had 6 up until a few months ago. And I was actually feeling like that was starting to be too many for me. I mean, I also know people that have 10, 20, even a few crazy people that have 30 cards, and they pay them on time and they get the great rewards. Now, that's not for everybody. The average person has about 3 credit cards. And for me, I've actually decided that personally, I'm going to stick with 3 for the time being as well. I actually canceled a few of my cards. There were increasing overlaps between the rewards categories. There were a couple that I was paying annual fees on that I really wasn't getting that much value out of. So I ended up making the decision to trim back a little bit, which runs a little contrary to the typical advice. A lot of people say leave old cards open for that available credit, even if you're not using them. And if you're paying an annual fee, you can do what's called a product change and switch to a no-fee card from the same issuer. So you keep the credit line, but it helps your credit score and avoids the fee. The thing is, I thought it was pretty complex. I mean, I keep my utilization low to begin with. I just wanted to simplify a little bit. So this is one of those know yourself kind of things where I really felt like I could still do a good job of maximizing rewards with 3 cards. I could keep my credit score high with 3 cards. I just thought it was a little much to kind of manage the 6 different monthly payments. And plus my wife's always telling me we have too many cards. And she's like, well, wait, what do I use this one for? And so I decided to skinny down a little bit, but you do need to know yourself. But I definitely think for most people, you should have more than one because then you have a backup. And you also have cards that do different things. You know, we've talked a lot about rewards and interest rates, but also stuff like foreign transaction fees. I mean, hopefully we can all start traveling again before too long, and you may want to have a card that has no foreign transaction fees or a card that has a really low interest rate or, you know, whatever your profile is. I tend to think the sweet spot for most people is maybe 2 or 3 cards.
Yeah, and that's super interesting. Like for me and for the business owners that are watching, like when I was talking to my friend that was telling me to get all these cards, I was like, this is actually way more trouble than it's worth, for me at least. Like, I don't want to have all these cards because then I need to do all the bookkeeping every 2 weeks on all these cards. Now, I use QuickBooks, so it pulls everything in, but it is, for me, it was more trouble than it was worth for sure. To like really maximize rewards. We're also not, you know, maybe if I was spending $1 million in ad spend like some of my other friends, then it makes sense. But yeah, I think for me, I'm kind of with you with like keeping things a little bit lower. So it's not as much kind of oversight. But if you don't mind me asking, what are the 3 cards that you would recommend people get for personal use? Is there any 3 that are the top of your list for we'll say good credit?
Yeah, it is highly variable. So some of the questions, and I'll get some specific names in a minute, but just in general, you want to ask yourself, first of all, are you paying these cards in full? If you are, great, go for rewards. If you're not, you need to prioritize that interest rate. Maybe you just stick to cash or debit until you can pay in full, or you just get a super low interest card because it doesn't make sense to pay 15% on a credit card to get 1 or 2 or 3% cash back or airline miles. Interest rates in general are really low. We're seeing record low mortgage rates. We're seeing very low auto loan rates. Credit card rates are still high. So you want to be mindful of that. And then it comes down to how do you spend? What categories do you spend a lot in? What do you want? Do you want cash back? Do you want travel miles? How much work do you want to put in? You know, we've talked about how some people, they're fine with juggling 10 or more cards. Other people, they just want to set it and forget it and use 1 or 2. So I would say in general, actually, the way most people net out on this is most people like cash back and they don't want to be terribly complex about it. So for them, maybe you get a card like Citi Double Cash or the PayPal MasterCard or the Fidelity Visa Signature. These cards all give 2% cash back on everything. And it's just really, really simple. No annual fee on any of them. That's a good baseline. Now, personally, I also like cash back, but I tend to focus on a few different categories. So I spend a lot on groceries. So I have the American Express Blue Cash Preferred card. That gives me 6% back at the grocery store, 3% back on gas and public transit. This is a really good card, especially if you spend a lot on groceries. There's a $95 annual fee, but for me, I think it's well worth it. The second one I have is the Chase Freedom Flex card. That's one of those 5% rotating category cards. So that's going to give you 5%. This quarter is actually PayPal and Walmart, which is a super broad set of categories that I had no time or no difficulty maximizing that in no time. So it changes every quarter. Sometimes it's groceries, sometimes it's gas, but that's a card that I recommend. It also gives 3% back on dining, which I really like. And then the other card I have is the Capital One Venture. And while they advertise this as more of a travel miles card, I've actually been using it as a cashback card. This was kind of a shift that they made during the pandemic. So you used to get the best value redeeming for travel, but nowadays I can get 2% cash back on anything if I redeem. It's basically like a little half-step measure where you have to redeem to offset other purchases. So I can offset money that I spent on dining and streaming services and things like that. So that's basically my version of a 2% cashback card. They don't totally advertise it that way, but that's an example of how you have kind of a baseline card, and then you pick one or two others that really lean into how you spend a lot of money, for me, namely groceries.
That's great advice. That's really great. I think for a lot of people, then it's, to sum that up, is like really figure out how you are spending your money, what's going to be the best cards. I'm curious that where's the best website to go to figure out what the best card might be for you?
So we have a lot of great information on this at creditcards.com. And I haven't really talked a lot about the more premium travel cards yet, but that's another area that we might want to address just briefly, because it's all changed, certainly because of the pandemic, but a lot of people still get great value from travel cards. Maybe not as much this year, but a lot of people are really looking ahead to 2021. And even if right now you're spending mostly on groceries and day-to-day kind of stuff, you could get a great trip in the future based on this money that you spend now. There's kind of a saying in the industry that a lot of these frequent flyer programs have really become more frequent spender programs. So a lot of people, especially young adults, they love cards like the Chase Sapphire Reserve and the Amex Platinum. These are ways that you don't necessarily have to travel a ton to get great travel benefits, because you use that everyday spending, you pay it off, you earn the rewards. So that's another category where it may sound steep, and it is. I mean, to pay $550 a year for a credit card, but there's so many credits that help offset that. So there's a $300 travel credit on that Chase Sapphire Reserve. Now, this year they've adapted that and they've turned it into more of a gas and groceries kind of thing. But in general, if you can fly first class and get into the airport lounge, it's kind of this whole champagne on a beer budget kind of thing. So that's one other consideration in how you spend and how you want to redeem.
So you would recommend keeping that card. That's actually one of the cards that I use. For me, my strategy has just been like, keep racking up points. Not going to redeem anything. I'm just going to rack up points. What do you think about that strategy? Is that a good bet to just keep racking up the points and wait to maybe travel in 6 to 12 months? What do you think about that?
Travel points are usually more lucrative than cash back. So not to get too kind of math geek about this, but generally with cashback cards, you basically get 1 cent per point. It's kind of the standard ratio. But with a card like Chase Sapphire Reserve, they're going to give you 1.5 cents per point when you book travel through them. They also have a bunch of partners you can transfer to, so a bunch of airlines and hotels. You could possibly do even better there. I mean, sometimes you can get crazy redemptions, like you can get an $8,000 airline ticket for 100,000 points. So basically you're getting 8 cents per point. That's way more than you would get for cash back. So you have to put some work in, and
what's the strategy there? Is that looking to transfer those points to, I guess, another program?
That's often where the best value is. And there's entire sites, like there's one that, so creditcards.com is part of Red Ventures, which also owns the Points Guy. The Points Guy is really great for these luxury travel hackers that they know every loophole, every partner, every, crazy loophole that you can get the absolute best deals. So if you're willing to put in the work, it does make sense to hoard those points and save them for a specific trip. And when I say hoard, I just want to clarify, you don't want to be a points millionaire. These things generally don't gain value over time, but you want to save up enough to get that really good trip. So once you save up those 100,000, points, then you can fly first class in a lie flat bed with champagne and caviar to Asia or Europe. That's really where the total sweet spot is for people that are able to do that spending and amass those rewards and make that work for them. You sometimes need to be a little flexible on the days you travel and that sort of thing. So not for everybody. I mean, I think the masses would appreciate a cash back card, but for people that maybe your business does a lot of spending and you can rack up rewards that way. And I do think a lot of people have an eye towards amazing trips in the future with the rewards that they're earning today. So I think that makes total sense. The annual fees are high, but these credit cards give a lot of great travel perks. And when people are not traveling, like now, a lot of them have really adapted and they've started giving you the ability to earn and redeem points for things like groceries, takeout, streaming, home improvements, things that people actually are spending on. Another good tip is ask them to waive or lower the fee. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? A lot of things are negotiable, including in the credit card world. And a lot of times you can get a break on that fee just by asking.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. You never know if you don't ask. That's great. That
Worth
is
a
really
try.
good advice.
Absolutely.
That is good. I'm going to try that actually, because for me, I'm like, oh man, I'm doing this project right now, so I don't have time to go and like take care of that, because that card is a hefty fee.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I don't have time to take care of it. But if it's just a phone call away and they could waive the fee, maybe that would be pretty incredible. So I want to kind of get more into figuring out what's the best way to kind of go about building your credit score if you have a bad credit score, as well as, and I don't know how much you can kind of give your opinion on this, but during this project, my assumption is, again, not like I went absolutely bankrupt, but the assumption is I don't have the best credit score. So I'm curious, for someone like myself that we're just assuming, and I don't know what's like a terrible, I think, what's the lowest you can go, like 300?
Yeah, 300 to 850 is the typical scale. Yep.
Okay. So if I didn't file bankruptcy and maybe like before starting the project, maybe I missed some payments and I just don't have a great credit history and I don't have a great score. Maybe we'll say we have like a 500 score, somewhere
Mm-hmm.
around there. I guess we're approaching month 4. I don't have any credit cards, so I haven't been like actually building my credit score at all. But let's just assume maybe I have been using a credit card, but I have no missed payments, no debt, none of that stuff. Where might my credit score be after, say, 4 months of no missed payments and maybe having like an open balance on a credit card of a couple $1,000s?
So just to level set for viewers, if this describes you, maybe you don't have great credit or you don't have any credit at all, it's a lot of people. Basically, half of Americans fit one of those two categories. 79 million have no credit whatsoever. So these are often young adults, immigrants, people that just have not been in the credit system. And then another 53 million people have lower scores, often because of some kind of misstep in the past, like maybe a late payment or something else that's dragging them down. So this is actually a really big consideration for a lot of people, because I mentioned earlier how important it is to have good credit. So what are some of the things you can do to jumpstart that? One is that, unfortunately, it does take some time. FICO is really the 800-pound gorilla in the credit space. They really invented this thing. They continue to be used in 9 out of 10 lending decisions. They actually require 6 months of history to even generate a score, at least typically. They do have this other thing called FICO XD that's more for beginners, but the mainstream, there's a lot of different credit scores out there. I don't want to complicate it too much, but for most people, you need 6 months of history. One way to jumpstart your history. So the first thing I would suggest to you or somebody else in this position, piggyback off somebody else's good credit. Get as an authorized user on somebody else's credit card. So it could be a parent, it could be a sibling, an adult who you trust that has good credit. You want to piggyback off of that. So if they add you as an authorized user on one of their credit cards, that good behavior is going to translate. Bad behavior can sometimes translate too. So you want to make sure that you pick wisely. You want to pick somebody who's paying on time, they're keeping their debts low. The credit companies have caught on to this a little bit, It still helps. It often doesn't help as much as it did a few years ago, but still, get on somebody's account as an authorized user. I also think, because we're not limited to just one strategy here, there's a lot of things that go into credit. I also think that it's good for somebody like you to start opening credit in your own name too. So even if you have to start with a beginner kind of product, so that could be a secured credit card. A secured credit card is when you put down a deposit that serves as your credit line. It's usually relatively low. It's maybe like $200, $300, maybe $500. That serves as the credit line. So it's really no risk to the issuer. If you don't pay them back, they take your deposit. You're supposed to pay them back, of course. They actually want you to come up with other money every month to pay the bill to show some responsibility. And if you do that for 6 to 12 months, your score will improve. They'll typically graduate you to a better card. Student credit cards are kind of a twist on the same strategy. Those are usually unsecured, as in you don't have to put down a deposit, but they typically come with relatively low limits. They're fairly low risk. They're generally more forgiving when it comes to what you can get approved for. And there's this whole class of fintech cards now. So financial technology companies, Apple would be one. Apple Card is actually one of the more generous cards with accepting a lot of people. And they will not even check, they won't do a hard check on your credit. They do what's called a soft check, so it doesn't hurt your score. And they'll actually let you know ahead of time if you were approved, what your limit would be, what your interest rate would be. So a card like Apple Card or some of these startups like the Pedal Card or Tomo Credit, these realize that a lot of young adults in particular don't have credit. So they're going to look beyond the credit score. They might look at your income. They might look at your expenses. They're going to see if you're a good risk. So bottom line here, authorized user, look at a product that you're more likely to qualify for, and then just start building from there. These are all good ways to get in the door.
This is great advice. I did not know that kind of, we'll call it a loophole of finding someone that could be like an authorized user. So I'm curious, someone like myself, I'm building a business that is going to probably need to scale Facebook ads or different ad platforms. And if I want to be able to do that, I'm going to need a certain amount of credit available to be able to scale ads. So is there any recommendations for someone like me who is just starting a new business, doesn't have business history at all? We're assuming like not the best credit. Is there any way I could really quickly get access to a lot of credit, or increase my score quickly? Because you're saying it's a slower process. Is there maybe like a way I could get someone to be like almost like a co-signer, like you kind of like how you had mentioned I'm on their credit to increase my own score, but is there a way to maybe get someone as maybe a co-signer on a credit card that I want to open? Is that something people do?
Business credit and personal credit get very intertwined. I think this is another common misconception. A lot of business owners think that business credit cards are solely about the business. It really has a lot to do with your personal credit history as well. In fact, most business credit cards, especially small business cards, have a personal guarantee. So they're going to check your individual credit score. Not just your business has a separate credit score, but they're also going to check your personal credit score. And you'd be on the line personally if the business is not able to repay. So there really is a strong connection there. If somebody doesn't have great personal credit, it's going to be hard to get a business credit card, especially nowadays as we're in more of this risk-off kind of environment. Even the cosigner thing, that's technically not really much of a thing in the credit card world. It tends to be more of a primary account holder, and then others are authorized users. This is like a misconception too. Even within married couples, there are very few joint credit card accounts and very few cosigner accounts. Usually it's someone's account and then the other person is on it as an authorized user potentially. So, that would be an option potentially, for a business card. The thing is, you'd really have to open it in the other person's name, and then you would get on as an authorized user. I mean, you could get somebody to co-sign for something like a business loan or a personal loan. Unfortunately, access to credit has gotten tougher here this year. And a lot of economists are talking about this whole K-shaped recovery idea. Basically, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, unfortunately. And there is a lot of truth to that. And I think it relates to credit in the sense that right now, if you have a good credit score and a steady income, banks are starting to compete for you again. Back in the spring, they really locked everybody down and they were approving very few credit cards. Now they've started to open up, but they're being really selective. And they're really only looking at the highest credit scores, often 740 and above, and people with a steady income. So unfortunately, it has gotten much harder to get that kind of seed capital, especially from credit cards these days. You may have to piggyback off somebody else's credit score and account history.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. So earlier you mentioned like, hey, be an authorized person on a parent or a sibling's credit card. But what if you don't have a parent or a sibling that you could do that with? Could you maybe do that with someone that you're very close with and, give them something in return to let you be authorized on the card to increase your credit score? Or is there maybe even services that allow you to do something like that?
Yeah, you could use somebody else. So you could use a business partner or a friend, or, now we start to get in that sticky area of helping out family and friends, whether it's with business or personal expenses. We've done some research into this, and unfortunately, a lot of the time it goes wrong. I mean, close to half the time, either somebody loses money or somebody's credit gets dinged, or in general, I hesitate to advise the family and friends route just because I think those relationships are really important. And I generally advise not mixing business with family and friends. But that said, a lot of people do it. A lot of businesses get bootstrapped through friends and family kind of financing. My tip there would be, don't let it hurt the relationship. So if anybody's thinking about doing this, maybe you treat it like a loan, or I should say you treat it like a gift rather than a loan. You don't lend more than you can afford to lose. You don't want to, it's like that old thing about put your oxygen mask on before helping somebody else. You don't want super awkward Thanksgiving dinners forever and ever because your banker is sitting at the table, that happens to be your friend or family member. So, tread cautiously, but that said, people, they do what they have to do. And, there have been a lot of successful businesses that started this way, but those are some of the rules of engagement, I think.
Okay, wow, that's super interesting. So for me, I guess I'm trying to think here. If let's say I was able to pull off some of these strategies and I was going to go get a business credit card, what I get in, and let's not even like focus on utilization at all and what my limit would be. Are there business credit cards for people with lower credit scores that, maybe don't have the highest limits?
It's tougher. I mean, I do think that you'd probably have to look at some of the more creative offerings. Another one that's actually been making a lot of waves in the business card world is Brex, B-R-E-X. Brex is a very hot young startup that, they're going to be looking much more at cash flows. So, that would be a possibility. I also wanted to mention here, maybe something like crowdfunding could be a really appropriate way to start for a business like this. That has actually continued to gain a lot of traction in recent years.
Yeah, that's really great advice. That is really good advice. So, I guess on my end, I'm going to have to figure out, what is maybe a personal card that I can start with. Is there any, I guess, do's and don'ts in terms of using a personal card as your business card, going and opening up a personal card and being like, okay, this is going to be my business card. I'm only going to put business expenses on this.
When you're talking about a really new business, I don't mean this just for you, but kind of like for others too. I think that at the very beginning, you're starting from scratch. Is it truly a business yet? It's kind of a hobby. It's an idea. I think for a lot of people, your business credit, so to speak, when you're first starting out, is going to be your personal credit. It's going to be your personal savings. It's going to be money you raise from your personal network. That's just kind of my general feeling on it. You can technically get a business card even as a sole proprietor. Like if you're a freelancer, if you're a gig worker, you could technically get a business card. the terms and conditions are such that technically a business card is supposed to be only for business use. So like even if you're an Uber driver or something and you get a business card, maybe just based on your social security number, as kind of your employer ID number, so to speak, you can do that, but you're not supposed to put your personal groceries on that. You're not supposed to put your personal travel or your holiday shopping, or people do. I mean, the lines blur a lot and it's not that enforced, but I kind of take the other side of it is that, a lot of times these business expenses, so to speak, are probably going to land on a personal card for a while until you get a bit more established. But even realizing that a true corporate card, you need to have like $1 million in revenue typically to get really a true business card backed by the business. Even the small business cards have a personal guarantee. So I think the lines blur so much that, especially for a business starting out, I think it could make sense to use personal credit. And I guess really what I'm saying is mechanically and fundamentally, you are going to be relying on personal credit, kind of whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not. It's just the way a lot of these small business cards work, that they're not going to let the business stand on its own from a credit standpoint, usually until you hit that $1 million revenue mark. It really is going to be more on the founder's personal credit and finances up until then.
Totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. So then I could go and open like a card, like say with Pedal, that's for personal, but I could just use it for the business and then would really be good to go as long as I'm only using that for the business and keeping those business expenses, so it's easy to report.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go. Yeah, and I think this underscores also really a key part of the pandemic, and I think a key part of your project, which is to highlight that I believe there was a stat from Yelp that said that something like 60% of small businesses were in danger of failing. And that's just a really sad, troubling stat that I think we all need to do, what we can to support local businesses. And I think we can do that with our holiday shopping and other ways that we spend our money. But the point is that when you're a business owner, you are totally invested there. I mean, this is your personal finances, it's your business finances. They're so intertwined. I mean, the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into that, it's really hard to separate the two, I think, both legally, financially, in terms of time, effort. I really think they are one and the same. And I think that's just this super hard thing that so many businesses are wrestling with right now is like, how long can I hang on? Like, how much more do I want to put into this? How much more of my personal net worth and time am I going to put into like whatever your business is? I think that's the challenge that I really empathize with, and I think a lot of people are wrestling with.
Ted, this conversation has been awesome. I'd love for people to know more about how they can check their credit card or check what credit card's best for them, learn more about their credit score at creditcards.com. Can you just kind of give us an overview of what are some of the tools you have available at creditcards.com so people can go and learn more about, hey, maybe this is the better credit card for me right now, and what type of information you guys put out?
We have a lot of editorial content, calculators, news and advice for staying on top of your credit cards and really your personal finances in general, because so much of this is about spending habits and debt and, so a lot of important information there. We're also a credit card marketplace, so you can compare from all the major issuers and see, you're looking for a cashback card or a travel card or a low interest card. Hopefully 0% balance transfer cards will be bouncing back. That's another popular form of debt consolidation and reducing your debt. So kind of risk off right now in that sense. But a lot of people are in the market for a cashback card. Their spending habits have changed and they're looking for something new, or they're looking ahead to that future trip. So we have more information on all that at creditcards.com.
Awesome. Well, Ted, this was super helpful. This is very insightful. I hope when people watch this they'll go and check out creditcards.com and learn more about how they can increase their credit score. So I cannot thank you enough for joining me and having this conversation. I think what I've taken from this is, especially right now with the pandemic that's going on, it might be best to focus on slowly getting that credit score up and figure out other ways to finance the business. So I really appreciate you coming on, Ted. Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah, I'll be watching and other videos too. I mean, I'm really interested in what you've got going on. So good luck with everything. And yeah, thanks for including me.
All right, so that's it for this week's video. I hope you learned some valuable information about how to increase your credit score. I had a great time talking to Ted. Ted, thank you so much again for coming on the show. If you enjoyed this week's video, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and the notification bell to get notified every time we release a new video. Go out and increase your credit, get that utilization rate down, do all the things that Ted said, and I'll see you in next week's video.